When people talk about Kings Island attractions they've lost over the years, names like the Bat, King Cobra, Son of Beast, and Vortex usually dominate the conversation. But there was another attraction that quietly entertained millions of guests for nearly 3 decades before disappearing from the park landscape. Hello, everyone. Alongside the peripatetic Ryan Suhr, I'm Don Helbig, and this is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics drops 3 times a week, every Monday, every Wednesday, and every Friday. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or follow us on your favorite podcast apps.
So, Ryan, on this episode of Tower Topics, we're going to be taking a trip back to Rivertown to remember Kenton Cove's Keelboat Canal. That was a ride that combined the charm of a log flume with innovative technology with a splash of airtime. It may not get talked about as often as some of Kings Island's legendary coasters, but more than 40 million riders experienced this attractions during its 27-season run. Did you?
I did. We finally get to talk about another historic ride that I got to ride. I've got vivid memories of it. And for those of you who have ridden it, especially my age where it's kind of like it went away when I was relatively young, there are 2 things you're going to remember. I'll show you a picture of one. Number 1, the double chutes. We're going to get to that, I'm sure, because that's super interesting. Number 2, it didn't load like the current log flume does. It had like a turntable. Think it's more like Phantom Theater than it is like a log flume, where they would bring in groups, half dozen at a time, and they'd load up these boats and the turntable would send them off. Actually, I would say it's more tantamount to like Whitewater Canyon. It would load that way, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah, it helped with capacity having it, turn like that. But, when you look at the birth of Kenton Cove's Keelboat Canal, was set the stage in 1973. That's when the ride debuted. Kings Island, it was its 2nd season. The park was expanding with 3 new rides that year. You had Kenton's Cove Keelboat Canal. You had the Flying Dutchman, which you can still ride at Kentucky Kingdom, and Band Curve. Boy, did I miss that ride. It replaced the short-lived Kenton's Cove canoe attraction. So some may remember that, only if you went to the park in 1972. But there were some construction delays, so it didn't open until the fall of 1973. Now, the other 2 rides did open with the park that year in April, but this one, it was, late in the fall of 1973 before it gave its first rides.
Oh, I did not see. I learned something here. So it opened in the fall, almost when it was out of season.
Yeah, like late summer, fall. So yeah, I mean, it was almost toward the end of the season. There were a lot of construction delays, but that season, we went in August, beginning of August, and weren't able to ride it, but it was, getting closer. But you could see that was like towering compared to the other log flume, which at the time, when you're that age, that one looks like it's got such a huge drop and everything. And then you look at this one and you're thinking, oh, this is going to be massive. So I couldn't wait to ride it, the next year. But this was an attraction that was kind of, ahead of its time. It was one of the first flume rides anywhere to feature, that turntable loading platform that you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really to help with the capacity. You had the interior chute and the exterior chute, so that was an interesting concept there. You never knew which one you were going to get, until you got to the drop. That increased throughput. It added to the ride, rewrite factor too, that you wanted to try to get the other side, but it was also, like I said, very high capacity. But unfortunately, by the late 90s, only the interior drop remained in operation.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm not sure when I wrote it if it had both chutes open. I feel like it did, but I would have written in like the mid-90s, so maybe I barely caught it.
I mean, capacity wasn't what it had been, with it anyway. I mean, the popularity of it had waned a little bit, so it wasn't what it was. But it was still, a fun ride. Guests, I think, myself included, we absolutely loved it. Great family attraction.
Yeah. So the 2 chutes. Now, I don't have like vivid memories of this, but I'm assuming that it had a switch kind of thing at the bottom, and probably the choke point for capacity for a lot of these log flumes is the lift hill. So it had 2 different lift hills, so you could have two log flumes on it at the same time. So that's why they could dispatch them a lot more quickly out of the station. Am I correct about that? Or was there another reason?
Yeah, you are correct. You are correct. But
now, one of them
in Rivertown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of them closed, and I'm assuming it became a parts donor for the other. Like one of the mat lifts went bad, and they started taking parts off it, and that's why only one chute was open in the end. Did they run water down both sides? Like, did it at least have the illusion that both sides were open?
Just the one.
Okay.
I mean, when you got to the base of it, I mean, the water was all down there, but there wasn't because it was closed off. It's like a little drizzle coming down it. Got it.
Yeah, long ride too. I remember the current log flume is longer than you think, ride-wise time, but you got some airtime out of it too, I remember.
Yeah, very relaxing ride through the tops of the trees. That splashdown was pretty thrilling. You mentioned the airtime, unexpected airtime. You don't expect that like on a flume ride. It was a kind of a bridge attraction too, between the gentle rides in the park and the higher thrills that you had at that time. But it was a lot of fun. I miss it. A lot of guests, whenever you see that kind of surface out there on social media somewhere, whether it's something that, we posted in Tower Topics or in our personal channels, whatever, and people will talk about, I really miss that ride. They should bring it back.
Mm-hmm. Was this the Aero Development log flume?
Yes.
Yeah. Let's bring up that picture again. Now, the hut style station, I do remember that. Now, you mentioned it was through the trees. This
Tree
one,
top, yeah.
Did it? I'm trying to remember. Did it drop you down to ground level and then tow you up again with the two chutes, or were you always at the top and then you would go down the chute to the end?
You were, kind of at the top. You kind of turned a corner and then you kind of went down.
So do you get towed up to the chutes though? Or were you always that high? That's what I'm trying to remember.
High. Okay. You were pretty high.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
So you were pretty high throughout the ride. I mean, you weren't ground level going up with that. No, I mean, you were pretty high up, throughout the ride.
Yeah. So 2000 was the last season for it, and I don't think that there was an announcement. It was just gone in 2001, if I recall.
I knew that it was going to be going. They did kind of announce that was going to be the home of a new attraction coming in 2020 or 2002. So demolition began before the 2001 season. So when you came to the park that year, you saw it all taking place and everything. But eventually become home to Tomb Raider: The Ride in 2002, later known as the Grip. But yeah, I mean, it was kind of sad. I mean, you could tell it was nearing the end, 1998, 1999, then going into 2000. So you could kind of tell it was getting near the end of its run. But it was, like I said, it was a fun ride. I think, it may be gone, but it remains one of those attractions that longtime Kings Island fans, they remember it fondly. Not the tallest, not the fastest, or most heavily marketed ride, in the park, but it delivered exactly what a great attraction, should be. A memorable experience that fit its surroundings and appealed to a wide audience.
What do you think the legacy of the ride is?
I think the legacy of the ride would just be, what I just, that it fit the surroundings, and it when you think about Rivertown, it kind of epitomized, the theming of Rivertown, with all the water and the tree, everything about it, kind of said Rivertown. So I think that would be kind of what, to me would be the legacy of it, would be something that, the families enjoyed doing together, and that it was memorable, and that it was something that, you wanted to do again and again. You climbed aboard those keel boats, you drifted through the trees, and then that splashdown. That's probably the most memorable piece of it, would be that splashdown. It was a rite of passage, in Rivertown, and a summertime tradition that lasted, nearly 3 decades. So there was a lot to like about it, a lot to remember about it.
Yeah, 40 million riders, so not a few. This is one of those rides where I'm grateful that I got to ride it. I know that there's some of them in there we talk about them and you're like surprised. Like I remember a couple weeks ago, when we were recording with Todd Robertson, and you were talking about Saltwater Circus. I don't remember if it was on the air or not. And you're like, oh, Ryan, you would have loved it. I saw it. I went to Kings Island on a field trip in like maybe 93 or so. I think it was 93 because I think Top Gun was there. And I got to see Saltwater Circus. I distinctly remember that. And I got to do, I think I did the wild animal safari twice.
Yeah.
Once on that field trip and once with my aunt on that first visit ever. So I do have memories of those things. While it's one of those things where like, the fact that Kings Island had a zoo, for people that were born in like, 1998 or 2000 or whatever, that's such a distant thing. That's so hard to believe. While it's kind of like me with like, oh, Kings Island had a canoe ride. It's like, I can believe you, but it's hard for me to picture that because it was there. It was gone long before I was born.
Yeah.
So this is another one of those rides where I'm grateful that I got to ride it. I'm grateful that it was unique and it had the cool loading station and the dueling platforms and stuff.
And you back in that era, I mean, you weren't, the racer was about as high as it got. The Beast, for its height, 110 feet off the ground at its highest point, but hugging the ground. But this is one of those rides where you were up off the ground, going around in treetop levels and stuff, throughout it, and then you kind of came to where before you got to the drop in that. But it was fun. It was memorable, but really was like if you talk about rides that were the perfect fit for Rivertown, I mean, that was one of them.
Yeah. So let's turn it over to the listeners. Did you have memories of Kenton Cove Keelboat Canal? And tell us about your memories. And for those of you who have ridden it, especially, would you trade in the current log flume for it? I think that there's an argument for that, but I think there's an argument against it because of the history.
Yeah, for me, that's why I would not trade it for that, because there is the history, and for me, it dates back to Coney Island. When it was new in 1968 there.
Yeah,
and that was a big deal. Huge deal back in 1968. I'm just a young kid, but I remember riding it, and not, now it's kind of, you go through the, the trees and stuff a little bit with it at Kings Island, but there was more out in the open a little bit at Coney Island. But I remember riding it there, and then it was one of those rides that came over, so it was that connection to Coney Island. So for me, I wouldn't want to lose that connection to Coney Island, so I would pick it for that reason. The better ride was Kenton's Cove Keelboat Canal. I think was the better ride of the two. Mm-hmm. But because of the history, the nostalgia, the connection to Coney Island, I would have kept that one.
So when we talk about here's a fun fact, and you can verify this. I'm pretty sure it's true though. When they moved the log flume we currently have, whatever name they're calling it nowadays, didn't they replace all the fiberglass on it when they moved it? So it's almost like a new ride.
They redid that. There was a year where it wasn't running, and it was around 2000, I think it was, where a year it did not operate. And then they brought it back, and that's when they replaced a lot of it.
Okay,
it was only 3 or 4 years old when it came over to Kings Island. It wasn't
maybe
old.
They're hard to move. I've never heard of a moved log flume. Leave us a comment if you've heard of one. Maybe they're hard to move. I've always heard that they essentially rebuilt it and they just ordered new fiberglass from Aero. Maybe it's cheaper to do it that way.
It's the same layout, same layout.
Oh yeah.
That it was there, so it might have been new, but it was only like 3 years old. So
yeah, it definitely wasn't worn out. But I'm just trying to think. I've always heard that, and I'm thinking maybe it's difficult to disassemble something like that and transport it and set it up again. I don't know. If anyone's heard anything about that, if you got park historians,
$100,000 when it opened at Coney Island.
$500,000.
$500,000 was the most expensive ride at Cincinnati's Coney Island. $500,000.
Oh God, I don't even want to put that. That's like about $12 million today. Wow. All right. Kenton Keelboat Canal. So again, I'm glad I have memories of that. Let's talk about the YouTube comment of the day. Coaster Carter said, "Rip Roaring Falls is a fantastic addition to Carowinds and shows that someone somewhere at corporate is listening to the surveys and the feedback. This and Charlie Brown's River Raft Blast, new for 2025, are important to the overall ride lineup as they fill a void since Carowinds had no water rides in the dry park. Does a new water ride at Kings Island fill a void?" That's a good question. KI has 3 water rides in the dry park still. A new modern water ride would be cool, but is it necessary? I could see them replacing Congo Falls, and a bonus would be a great visuals in the front of the park. I do think that there are other voids more important to the park first. A modern multi-launch coaster and thrilling flat rides like an S&S Scream and Swing or anything like the random flats that Canada's Wonderland has would be a higher priority than a new water ride. All that said, I'm not holding my breath on any major capital expenditure for KI or any of the other parks in the future until Six Flags gets their financial situation under control more. I like how people throw that in. Like, they got a lot of debt, so they're not adding a flat ride.
No, but I think, I get what you're saying about some of the other rides that would definitely, fit what Kings Island needs. Some of the flat rides they have, like a Canada's Wonderland, but at the same time, it still goes back to the same thing. What are more guests going to enjoy doing together? That's the question. If you're going to spend money on a new attraction, you want the broadest appeal that you can have. You want to get the most bang for your buck. So that's why I think that would be a good addition to Kings Island, would be that water ride that Carowinds is getting.
Yeah. No, I do see Coaster Carter's point, though. They have 3. So it's not like, Carowinds didn't have any for like a decade. So I could see where the needs are in terms of just looking at it as a water ride, how the needs are far outweighed for flat rides. There's another mention of a Scream and Swing, just putting in your ear, just saying.
Yeah, I know. You love that ride, and I think there's a lot of Kings Island fans, guests that would love to have that. It would be a great addition.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I think that there are, when we're looking at it from terms of just a water ride, I completely agree with what Carter has to say. But I see your perspective of you're not seeing this as a water ride, but it's like a family attraction. So I see both sides of it. My only downside, as I mentioned in that episode, is that it's something that can only run for a couple months of the year, and we have Winterfest and Haunt and stuff.
They used to run Whitewater Canyon from the beginning of the season in April until the end of October. They used to run the flume ride all those months. They used to, run Congo Falls through that duration. So it's not because of weather that they don't. It's because of staffing, because they want to save some money. That's why they don't open those until Memorial Day, and they close them on Labor Day.
Do you think that like Whitewater Canyon should be open for Winterfest? Because I think that would round up the lineup.
No. I'm not saying you have to do that. I don't think it doesn't need to.
Right.
Do that. Is Orion open during Winterfest?
It could be. Chicago does it. I'm just saying.
I know.
But no, I think that they could do something cool with Whitewater Canyon during Winterfest. Like, they could be creative and do something different. But yeah, obviously a water ride would not be open during Winterfest. But I think that both are good arguments. But I think something that's immersive, I think, is what people are kind of going for. And I think that the reaction that people have had to Phantom Theater opening Nightmare is kind of a testament to that it's not thrilling. It doesn't have air times. It doesn't invert. But people love it because they have an experience by going through it. And that's what a good ride is. It's an experience.
Yeah, love it. It's re-rideable, and they can do it together.
Yeah. It's fun, and it's a game. I actually kind of like the game on it. All right. Let's take this opportunity to give a shout out to our Prestige members. I want to give a big shout out to Miss Mandy, 1983, Lil Mac, 21, Brian Hauser, 330T, Aaron Bort, Jacob Fix, Damon Barnes, Dakota Cole, Eric Groud, Gibson Hills, Dustin Jackson, Songstress Miku, Medic 302, Eastern Coaster, Guys and Girls, Justin Y, Mike Garrett, Galaxy B-Boy, Greggy Rocks, Kayla La, T. Cleveland, Tim Dwelly, Sun Fun Sarah, Ian Ross, Connor's Lionel Trains. Connor, I'm so sorry I could not spit out your name right there. But thank you guys so much for supporting Tower Topics at the highest level. That's the Prestige level. If you want to be involved in Tower Topics, there's a link in the description. Members get early access to the videos, exclusive content, exclusive live streams, and some tiers even get a free t-shirt. So hit that link if you're interested, starting at just $2.99 per month. All right. Stick around, everybody. We got the listener questions coming up next. All right, first listener question, Zach from Denver. He said, in 2012, Kings Island did a daily trivia giveaway on Twitter to, I think, celebrate the park's anniversary. The last day was the grand prize, a VIP tour for 4. The last answer was Kings Island and Miami Valley Railroad, which we tweeted the full name of, and we're the second account with the correct answer. However, the first account to respond just typed out the short version, KIMVRR. Devastated with being second, we were fortunately surprised shortly after to learn we had won. The tour was great, and it is a core memory for our group that we still talk about to this day. My question is, was Don on the other side of this, and does he remember this contest? We've always wondered if we were selected because we typed out the whole thing, if Twitter was just showing us in a different order, or who responded first compared to what Don saw on his end. Either way, it worked out for us, so thanks for the memories.
Yeah, it was the 40th anniversary, and I created the contest that we were doing to celebrate the 40th anniversary, and running the Twitter account at that time, all the social medias at that time. The way as it came into the Kings Island feed, that's how the winners were selected. So how the park saw it on the park channel in terms of, the answers and that. I do remember that. And so it wasn't because that you spelled it out and the other person abbreviated. I mean, you both had the right answer. It was because that's how it came into the Kings Island feed. But those were fun things to do. That was something that Twitter hadn't been around very long yet, at that time. It really, doing that contest, I think we picked up another, 2 to 3, 4,000 new followers doing that. But it was fun to interact with the guests and have some of those different surprises. I remember the VIP tour that was, one of the grand prizes of that. But a lot of fun, and I certainly remember, that contest and the VIP tour, and that question that was the train.
Do you remember the 5 at 5 that you had to quit doing because all 5 were people asking about Son of Beast?
That was when we first started the Facebook page. Yeah, we had a thing it was on Facebook, not Twitter, but it was top 5 at 5, and we would answer 5 questions every day at 5 p.m. And you're right, everything was, as a decision been made on Son of Beast. What are you gonna do with Son of Beast? Have you thought about RMC? Have you thought about this? What's going on? So yeah, that was all we were getting. So we just stopped doing it.
Okay. Next listener question, Gary from Wattsburg, Pennsylvania. He said, hi, Don and Ryan. One day at Epic Universe versus a Six Flags Prestige Pass that you can literally do a whole year. To me, it's a no-brainer. Epic Universe and Universal as a whole struck me as an extreme money grab.
Aren't they all?
Yes, 25 restaurants. That's actually more shops and restaurants and things to spend more money than there is attractions. I remember going there, and the park itself closed at 6 p.m., but City Walk was open till 11. Money grab. I love Kings Island, and my home park is Cedar Point. To me, an immersive experience is staying at Lighthouse Point, enjoying the beautiful beach, walking along the pier, watching the sunset, enjoying the water park. To me, that's what I call an immersive experience. Not one day at a Florida park with simulations. I will take Cedar Point over Epic Universe for the ultimate immersive experience.
Well, I mean, I think everybody, has the different, opinions on what they're looking for. And for me, one of the things that, I like was, that immersive experience, that attention to detail, things that Kings Island's now lacking. A couple episodes ago, we talked about, you walk into the park and there's popcorn sitting out for a couple of days that people are trampling all over, not being cleaned up. Trash cans overflowing, out of ice, out of product. Little things like that kind of detract from the Kings Island, the Six Flag experience for me. So I thought, that one day at Epic Universe, so memorable. I was there with my daughter, my granddaughter, my son-in-law, and we just had the best time. It was just something that we're going to be talking about years from now. So everybody has a different. There's great value in Kings Island, Cedar Point. If you've got the Prestige Pass or a Gold Pass, and you can go whenever you want, as often as you want, visit the park however you want. You can go for 2 hours. You can go for 12 hours. Do whatever you want. So there's a lot of value in that. Nothing wrong with that at all. But everybody's going to have their own idea on what a visit to an amusement or theme park is to them, what they're looking for, what the expectations are. And I really appreciate your feedback there, and understand exactly where you're coming from.
I also want to point out that, first of all, I agree with a lot of what he's saying. My favorite part of Cedar Point is breakers and the beach and stuff like that. I like that more than the park itself. So I agree with that. But some of the stuff he's saying is like, a whole season at Cedar Point or at the Six Flags parks and staying at Lighthouse Point. Well, staying at Lighthouse Point is an extra cost on top of your pass too. So, I think it would be a better argument if it was like, I get to have the best roller coasters in the world and all these stage shows and stuff like that. That's a better value, because a lot of the stuff you're mentioning is more of an apples to oranges debate than we were even having up one day at Epic Universe.
Well, let me ask you this too. You talk about the money grab. Did you spend more on your drink and dining plan than you would at one day at Epic Universe on food and drinks?
Probably.
Yeah. So, when you're talking about money grab, and you're still spending the same amount of money that you would have, regardless. So, everybody's going to look at it differently, and priorities change over time. When I was, the years that I would ride the racer all the time, the Beast, and I would go on these roller coaster trips and, was trying to ride as many different roller coasters as I could, I would see it a lot differently than I do today. But now, being a dad, now being a grandparent, the way my wife likes to enjoy parks and things, it's a totally different, view than I had, 30 years ago. 40 years ago. So, I see it differently at my age today than I would have back in the 1980s. So it changes over time too, or sometimes, there's a lot of guests that they don't care about, the shows. They don't care about landscaping or anything like that. They just, want to ride the roller coasters, and that's fine. Again, there's nothing wrong with that either. I'm somebody that did a lot of that myself, so everybody has a different thing that they're looking for. And as long as you leave whatever park you're at, that you feel that, you got, had a great day and you got value out of the money that you spent, then, that was the right decision for you.
Yeah. And it's funny how the arguments also align quite a bit too. I mentioned, walking along the beach, walking along the pier, watching the sunset, all of those are experience-based things. So Gary's not even making an argument about like, these rides or whatever. So we've always talked about how, theme parks come down to experiences, not necessarily, ride records or whatever. And I think that you guys are so incredibly on the same page about that. Just diverge on, would you rather do it once at at Epic Universe or all season at Cedar Point? So
yeah,
I think
that. And then next year, I'll have, I've talked to my wife about it, and I said, I'm leaning toward, the Disney annual pass, and, spending, a couple of times a year going down, spending, 9-10 days at a time down there, and just enjoying the Disney parks. I had such a fantastic time doing that this year that I could be content with that at this point, because there's so much that I enjoy about those parks, and, just everything about it, from the food and the attractions and, the theming, just the Disney magic piece of it. There's just a lot to like about that. So, again, the priorities change, but there's like Haunted Mansion, Tower of Terror, I could ride those things all day long and be content.
Oh, sure. Yeah. My favorite part of Disney is going to Epcot and seeing what they thought the year 2000 was going to look like in 1982.
Yeah.
That's my favorite part of it. Because Epcot, to me, it's like, it reminds me of a 90s mall, especially like the land pavilion. It even kind of smells like water damage. Yeah, it's so weird because like I didn't visit Epcot growing up. I think I was like 25 the first time I visited Epcot, but it's still so nostalgic for me because it just screams like my childhood. And I don't know if that's by design or not, but yeah, it's a different experience. And, we're not talking about Disney. We're talking about Epic Universe. And, if I had to choose between like a week-long Disney vacation versus, a season at Kings Island, like I think that's a much bigger debate or whatever. But Yeah, no, it's an interesting perspective, and we want to hear more of this stuff from people of what they think about that debate, because it seemed like that kind of got people going. But yeah,
It did. It did. But like I said, everybody sees parks and has different things that they, want to accomplish when they go to one, and so that's what makes the industry, great too. Is that there's just so many different ways that you can enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's wrap it up, Don.
All right. I'm Ryan.
You are?
no,
that'd be me. That'd be me.
He's Ryan. He's Ryan, and I'm Don, and this is Tower Topics.